Well, it is once again another episode of the Pentecast podcast. Just like that, we are here recording once again. This is actually a great honor, and I've actually already told Heather Cooney this. Heather is the first guest that we have had that Ryan and I have never met until sitting down and having a cup of coffee with you. So welcome to the podcast, Heather.
Thank you. Thank you both.
She is so talkative and outgoing. We couldn't hardly get the camera equipment and the microphones up soon enough to get her going. But our vision was to sit down and talk with complete strangers, as well as people that we knew that had amazing stories. And so this is kind of, I would say, we've been doing the podcast for a year. This is kind of a monumental moment for us.
Yeah.
So it's an honor to have you. This is the first time I've ever spoke to you. But the way that this kind of all started, getting to meet Heather, was Andrew's idea. And I wanted him on during youth camp, and he mentioned your story. He told me one or two things about you, and I immediately was trying to get off the phone, like, okay, perfect, let's work it out. And I wanted to get off the phone because I didn't want to hear another detail. I didn't want to hear another detail. I think I've shared with Ryan what I knew about you. And your story and I would like us to get into that. I've been racking my brain. What do I title this thing? And really, I think it's fitting to title it The Story of Heather Cooney.
Yes, sir. So I got married first whenever I was 18. I was just 2 months away from being 19. And we was married, I guess. Well, he started liking me back whenever we was 13. So we done the whole graduation, the senior trip, all that stuff together, youth rallies, all that kind of stuff. And then finally he was 19 just by 1 month, and then I would have been 19 2 months later.
As young as you could get married, right?
Yeah.
I thought we only did that in Georgia.
Yeah.
No.
Very young.
Mind you, I'm the oldest of 10.
Wow.
Whoa.
So I was ready.
You're ready to get out of the house. You're the oldest of 10. My mom's the youngest of 6.
Mm-hmm. I was the oldest of 10. So and they're not only 10, there's 7 girls and then the 3 boys on the end.
Oh, my Lord.
And 2 of my children is older than my baby brother.
Okay, yeah. So. I have some cousins that I think we're pretty close in age, so I know how that feels. Yeah. Okay, so obviously oldest sibling of 10, you're ready to get out of the house.
Yeah.
Sounds to me like you found love early in life.
Mm-hmm.
That young, you guys go through these camp meetings, youth camps together, are inseparable, and then you get married at the ripe old age of 19.
Well, he was 19, I was 18. Almost 19. Almost 19. So we get married. I moved to Fort Worth. Me and him did in our little trailer there. And I think right at 11 months later in August, he had lost his job working for the city. And so he started working with my dad because my dad has a construction business. So he was driving back whenever a preacher friend of ours turns out in front of him and hits him head on. I mean, the man is an amazing pastor,
it was just an accident.
And a freak accident, yes.
It was. And it just so happened he was involved.
Mm-hmm. Yep, and it killed him instantly. There on the wreck site. A friend of ours was with Jason. He was going to work with my dad that day as well, and he broke a femur bone. He was care flighted at the hospital that day and whatever. But yeah, that all happened 11 months.
After getting married.
Yes, I was expecting. I had a honeymoon baby.
Yeah.
My oldest daughter is from my first marriage. So she was born in June, and my husband passed away August the 23rd.
Mercy.
And you're 19.
19 years old, 11 months we was married.
Okay, and I know you can't, Ryan, just say something so everybody knows you're here, because I'm going to take over if you let me.
Hey, guys.
You're 19 years old. Mm-hmm. How do you even process losing your husband 11 months in? I mean, I can't imagine,
Newborn baby.
His great-grandparents, his Papa Bud, well, it was a year ago
A year ago yesterday that he passed away.
He passed away.
Yeah.
And when this records, it'll be several weeks later.
Sure.
But a year ago yesterday at this recording date, and they were married shy of 75 years.
Yep, 48 days short.
So that's just as hard to me, for my mind, to perceive. But I could not imagine, the thoughts of you guys were planning your whole lives.
Mm-hmm.
You had a baby. Was it a girl? You said who was on the way.
Mm-hmm.
How do you process?
She was 2 months old.
Or she was 2 months old when he passed.
Mercy.
That's right. And so, how do you immediately go into survival mode and say, I've got to have the Lord?
Mm-hmm. It was definitely crazy at that time. I lived an hour and 15 minutes away from Mom and Dad. Immediately, my mom and dad was there within, a few hours and pretty much packed everything up and helped me move back. It was definitely a different time for sure. For one, being a young person, it's really hard because, y'all remember the days of being a teenager, and wondering where in the world you're going with life, and then you finally get married.
The uncertainty, right?
And you think, okay, he's a preacher. He's started preaching out some. Different ones have started, asking him to come. And then all of a sudden you're thrown right back into the whole, what do I do with my life again?
That's awful.
Yeah. It was definitely and during that time, a friend of mine, her house was broke into that time. And the enemy really just bombarded me with fear. So my friend was broke into there at her place, and God just helped her out. She was in the bed or whatever, her and her little girl. Her husband had just left for work, and he had come into the room, and he had a mask over his face or whatever. And he started coming towards her with one of her own kitchen knives because he had gone through her kitchen and picked up one of her knives. And she just started praying, and she kicked him in the shin and told him to leave, and she was rebuking the devil, the whole time. And he literally turned and ran, said his eyes got huge and he ran or whatever. And hearing the story is amazing, the fact that God just miraculously helped her, right, in that circumstance. But the devil used it to me to really attack me, going through what I was going through. I have never been a very fearful person. Growing up, in a family of 10, the oldest, well, then it was only 9 or 8. But
enough, right?
I guess it was 9. My dad had a building out beside the house. That was my bedroom. It wasn't even in the house,
Yeah.
I mean, when you got that many, you got to improvise.
I didn't have an issue, I didn't.
Being alone,
I'd take the trash out at nighttime. Didn't bother me. I'd walk clear to the end of the road. Didn't bother me. Never did. But during that time, I remember tacking my curtains to the wall, just fear, how I was going to handle things, and having such a small baby and wondering how in the world I was going to make it. Of course, then there's the whole financial side of it that just comes,
absolutely
raining in. That'll definitely make you go crazy, trying to figure out how in the world you'll handle it.
Yeah.
But I'll never forget, I went through it for about maybe a week or so, and I finally got tired of feeling that I just had no peace. I had no, it was too fresh and too hard to handle. So I went in there y'all, it reminds me back whenever I was a little girl walking in there to my parents' room, going in there to my dad and being like, Dad, I can't do this no more,
Yeah.
And he said, Heather, you can't continue living like this. I just went to, and him and my mom got with me, and we began to pray, and God really just done a work that night, to really
give you the peace that passes all understanding.
Yes, and that type of fear I have never faced again.
Wow.
Not that crippling fear. You have your normal fears that you face on a daily basis, but never that like to just drive somewhere. I didn't want to, I didn't want to go to anywhere. I didn't want to do anything, and that's not me. Yeah. I am a person that's always on the go. I go all the time. You can ask my family. They're all like, they check my location often because I'm always on the go.
Yeah. Well, here you have come down from South Carolina to do a podcast and participate in the youth
strangers.
That's right. That's right.
But anyhow, that was one of the victories that God really helped me with during that time.
How far of a time period was this after you lost your husband?
That was probably within the first couple of months.
And so he moved affirmatively that fast.
Yes, sir. It was that night. Like, I went to bed, that was probably, I don't know, about 2:00 in the morning, whenever it was so heavy and I couldn't take it no more. I wasn't sleeping at night. I wasn't able to focus, on anything, My baby was a wonderful kid. It was the best kid you ever seen in your life. She'd sleep all day long, sleep all night long, wake up every 4 hours and eat and back to bed again.
Well, God bless you. Did everybody hear that brag right there? God bless you. Ryan's over there, me and him are in misery.
Andrew and I almost killed all of our children today. So that's not the case for us.
Our kids are screaming, biting our ears and drooling.
Now, I won't say my second one was that nice.
Oh,
she
man.
was totally the opposite. But thankfully, looking back, I mean, it wasn't her keeping me up at night. It wasn't my children. It was just
enemy,
the fear, the enemy, just working me over. And that night, immediate deliverance,
Wow.
Praise God for that.
How many times after that did you have to go back to that night, in your mind? Maybe
I've gone back many times. Many, many times. I've used it on several different occasions, with testimonies, being a dorm mom for our youth camp back in South Carolina. I've used it several times there as a testimony, of how God used it, and how crippling fear can be if we allow it to be.
And how definite his move is.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. When he speaks peace to us, it's definite. It's definite.
So I was single a year and a couple months, I think, whenever God brought Matt into my life. And that was at youth camp at Russellville, the first time I seen him. Now, if he was here today, he'd tell you a whole different story, but promise me.
That's what husbands are for.
I can tell you right now, Miss Amy, she could probably tell you, we remember these kind of things.
God help us.
So we was at this youth camp, and this Samuel Snow and Bethany Snow, I don't know if y'all know them.
Yes,
but,
I do.
Samuel was best friends with Matt.
Okay, all right.
And Bethany was best friends with me at the time. So she kept telling me about this Matt Cooney. And so I had heard about him, seen maybe 1 or 2 pictures that she sent me or something like that. But that's
the power of technology.
Yeah. So with the flip phones back then too, the smallest flip phones.
Yeah. Couldn't even get good detail on that.
Mm-hmm. So he was at their place helping them out, I think, at that time. And he was on his way to Missouri, I believe, to meet someone else up there when he came through the youth camp and stopped on Thursday night and for church. I promise you, as soon as I seen him, I didn't see his face. I just seen his shoulders from the back. And I came to church late that night. Imagine that. I'll never forget looking at him going, I'm going to marry him.
Really?
I know that's Matt Cooney. I know it's got to be, and I'm going to marry him.
That's how Amy did whenever she saw me.
I just knew it. I knew right then that he was the one I was going to marry.
Wow.
Never did talk to him that night. He stood, he stood like right beside me, never shook my hand, never asked me how I was, never, asked anything about me. Now, he would say, that's not true. I shook your hand. But I promise you, he never did. But later on that week, I think that Sunday, he called me out of the blue and said that he had a burden for me.
I've never tried that one.
I've got a burden for you, baby.
I think that might work on Amy. I've got a burden for you.
Anytime I've ever had a burden, it involved blunt force trauma.
Oh, Lord.
He just said that he had a burden for me, in my situation, and he was, praying for us.
You
or
felt
whatever.
good after he told you that, though, didn't you?
Well, I didn't believe a word of it.
I'm loving getting to know Heather, Ryan.
Yes.
This is great.
I didn't believe it. So all that next week was Russellville camp meeting, and he had gone to the actual camp meeting. I didn't. And that whole week, we had talked off and on, that week or whatever, but I fasted that entire week. And what I didn't know is that Samuel and Bethany were both fasting that week, and so was Matt Cooney. And all of us fasted. None of us knew it.
Simultaneously, no one
Yes,
had a clue.
all of us did. And it was like we all knew what was supposed to happen, but without God making it happen, it wasn't going to work,
Right.
if you know what I mean. He came down to my mom and dad's that Saturday, I believe, and we went and ate somewhere and met and married 2 months later.
Wow. That's
Legit,
fast
2
moving.
months later. Yeah, he
And they
proposed
said
to me.
we moved fast. They were singing "The Devil Went Down to Georgia" when I showed up. They showed up to my trailer with pitchforks.
We
and
dated
torches.
5.5 years.
Yeah. You're gonna get Caitlin bitter about this episode.
She's already bitter.
So you met Brother Matt Cooney,
Friday or Saturday. We was engaged on Monday.
and that was at a youth camp.
Mm-hmm.
So would you say that was your favorite youth camp?
Probably not. It was the most
Tumultuous.
tormenting one ever, because I knew I was supposed to marry him.
And you weren't eating all week. Make matters
that,
even
that
worse.
was at youth camp. Then there was that week in between.
Okay.
in the
Gotcha.
camp
I got you.
meeting.
Okay. And so
Wow.
you're engaged 3 days after you met. Mm-hmm. 2 months later, you're walking down the aisle again. At this point, is this fear that you prayed over, is it trying to rear its ugly head again at times? Like you've done this before, you got your hopes and dreams up, and
Brother Andrew, I can honestly say I never faced that.
praise God. That's what I wanted to
honestly-
hear.
I honestly never faced fear of my second husband dying, or the fear of getting married again, or that never even
That,
entered
my
my
friends,
mind.
is the power of the Holy
No
Ghost.
guilt or anything for getting remarried.
Now that's a whole different thing.
Okay.
I think I was kind of over that part, I believe. Part of me, sometimes, you do think, well, I wonder how they really feel or whatever. But by that point, it had already been a year and 2 months. Y'all, there's something about widows that I noticed the first go around, and it, and looking into it ever since. Most of the time, men go through it sooner than women. Within 3 months, they're ready to move on.
With
Women,
women or men?
Men.
Yeah,
Amen.
women, it's more like 6 to 8.
months. Mm-hmm. So yeah, and I would totally agree with you.
Yeah.
I think Caitlin said one time we were eating, and she said, "Oh, you'd have a girlfriend at my funeral," and you said, "Well, you wouldn't want me to go alone, would
That's
you?"
right.
That's what he told her. But there obviously I've never went through this, so I'm pretty ignorant. Disclaimer. There would be a level of guilt, I would say, Ryan, and
Yeah.
that was a great point, because number one, I wanted to hear you say that fear didn't come up again, but now it's a new challenge. What are they going to think about me getting married? Is
Sure.
it too soon?
Yeah.
It's your life,
Yeah.
and I would agree with Ryan that you're trying to process all this stuff, and it's not easy. It's not easy. So you marry him, your man of your, what would you call him? The man of your second dreams.
As crazy as that is, I guess. So
Yeah,
if you can have dreams start all over
you
again.
sure can. You sure can. You're living proof of that.
Absolutely.
You're living proof of that.
Yeah. So right here, I kind of want to go back a little bit with Matt Cooney's story. Matt was kicked out when he was 14. So he was very independent. extremely independent, very hard-headed.
I can't relate.
Very hard-headed.
Yeah.
He had his ways. Him living on his own. You know, South Dakota, you could get your hardship license at 14 years old, and that's what he did. So at 14, he had his own car. He had his driver's license. He had a job, and he had a room he lived in. Well, I guess an apartment type thing with another person that he came across, and they had a hotel. You know, I mean, not a hotel, an apartment at 14 years old. Somehow or another, I don't know. He did it. He worked his job. He finished school. He did go all the way to 10th grade. But then he finally just went and got his GED at this point because life with his family got extremely hard.
Really?
Yes, very, very hard. So then he ended up getting saved in Bartlesville, Oklahoma. His parents ended up asking him for some reason to go to Oklahoma, so he moved to Bartlesville, Oklahoma with his mom and dad. He moved back in with them. Well, 2 months later, I believe, his mom and dad says, I'm leaving, going back to South Dakota. He was like, no, I'm staying. I got a job. I've got my own apartment. I'm not going anywhere. So he stayed right there. Sister Pam Shepherd, I don't know if y'all know her.
We don't.
It was a pastor, brother, what's his name? Roger Shepherd, him and Sister Pam. She had walked into where he worked. He worked eyeglasses or whatever. And from what I'm understanding, she ended up breaking down on the side of the road. The man that helped her was the owner of the eyeglass place. And he had told her that, you know, he sells glasses and whatever. So she was like, well, since you helped me, I'm coming to your store and I'm going to get myself a new pair of glasses because I need them. So that's how she met Matt Cooney, a little holiness woman.
Mm-hmm.
So she sits down and she began to talk to Matt about his life. And according to Matt, he thought he was saved at the time because now there is a little old woman that took him to church back when he was just a little kid. She went and picked him up every service and took him, and he was always tender towards God. And so he had a little background with that, but other than that, that was it. Mm-hmm. So she began to ask him about his salvation. Oh, yes, I'm saved. And she was like, well, where do you go to church? And he said, well, I go to I can't think of it. So anyhow, the name of the church, she was like, oh, so you must go to Brother So-and-so's church here in town since that's what you are, right? Mm-hmm. And he was like, well, no. And she said, wait a minute, you said you've been living here 3 months and you haven't been to church? You know? And he was like, yes, ma'am. And she said, well, then you're not right with God, are you?
Wow.
And she pointed her little finger in his face and she said, you need to get yourself to church. And he was like, you know what, I'm coming. I'm going to come on Sunday. And he did. And that's where he came encounter with holiness.
Okay.
Was that little holiness woman in
as bold as a lion, huh?
Yes. Yes, very, very bold. So he ends up getting saved, gloriously saved, and God started transforming his life right there. He ended up getting filled with the Holy Ghost, and Brother Martin came through and found out that Matt Cooney was Native American, and he has always invested in Native American people, and found out he was from South Dakota. So he started investing in Matt and ended up paying for his first semester? For sure. And I'm pretty sure he invested a lot more in his Bible schooling at OBI.
So he went to OBI?
Yes.
My mom and dad did. That's
Yeah,
where they met.
He went all 4 years of OBI. And he ended up getting called to preach there at OBI. Brother Martin bought his first suit. Matt's dream, and this was something I didn't tell you a while ago, but his dream was to be a rodeo announcer. So he went to podcast school to broadcasting so he could be A rodeo, an auctioneer rodeo announcer.
Yeah. Wow.
He says that we pay lots of money for him to learn how to talk and preach.
He obviously, I've never met him, but I could obviously hear his sense of humor coming through you.
Oh, my word.
Definitely.
He was a big man with a way bigger sense of humor than you could ever imagine.
My kind of guy.
Yeah.
Constantly, all the time.
How long were you guys married?
Just shy of 14 years.
14 years.
Mm-hmm. So he ended up going through Bible school. We met in 2006. He graduated in 01, I think, 05. We married in 06. And was married for quite some, about 14 years, right up 14 years. We, right away, after we got married, 3 months, we ended up moving to South Dakota to start a work for the Lord there. Andrew, he was a part of all of that. And that's where Andrew's story comes in at, because he met my sister at our wedding. He was best man, and my sister was maid of honor. So,
okay.
Yeah, that's how they met. Back to us, though. Matt ended up starting a little church there. We ended up there about a year or so, and it didn't... I guess I could put it like this. It didn't take off like, we were hoping. Both. He was only 26, so he was very young.
Tough to admit that, right?
Yes, it was very tough for him to admit that. It was a dream of his that he always, ever since he got saved, to start a church.
South Dakota.
In South Dakota for his people. Because he was raised on the reservation there in South Dakota. Cooney Table. Badlands, yeah. Mount Rushmore, all of that is his homeland.
He grew up in heaven then, obviously.
Black Hills.
Wow.
Yep, that's exactly right.
Is he a Sioux?
Mm-hmm. Yep.
I wish I knew what you knew in history. You would get on my nerves. You can tell you when that tribe was founded. I'm over here going, who's suing who?
Lakota Sioux.
And so that, like I said, that's a tough pill to swallow.
Mm-hmm.
Admitting, we have issues trying to get this church off the ground. And so what after that?
So we moved back. We ended up taking a church. And by this point, we find out we're expecting with Avonlea. This was a year and a half after we got married. We have Avonlea, and we take the church there in Louisiana. We were there little over 2 years, I believe. And then the Lord started moving him again, and he felt like he needed to try to go back towards his dream again. And I believe we ended up leaving there and ended up in Texas again, and we just pastored a little church there I think it was a very, very short period of time. Mm-hmm. I didn't even realize that was that long. But Brother Rogers called Matt Cuny and asked him if he would come take over his work in Eagle Butte, South Dakota. And we prayed about it, and he just felt like that's where we needed to go at that point in time. And so we resigned the church, and I sold everything I had, like housewife.
You're a good woman. Traveling, going here, going yonder,
I did.
At this, was there any time in your life where you're like, I'm ready to settle down? Or were you just...
I can honestly say, Brother Andrew, at 16 years old, I'll never forget feeling like I would be a missionary's wife one day.
Okay.
And
so it was like
I
your
was
role.
already, yes, sir.
I can't get my wife off this dirt road. So
I love this dirt road.
I was ready. I was. And what was crazy is, as spontaneous and crazy as Matt Cooney could be, I was ready for it. I loved it. I did.
Really?
Mm-hmm. There was a couple of times it was a little bit like, that one should probably think about.
Yeah, you tell God to get with me too on this one, Okay. I don't know. Here in it's also, time can be really, really fast in itself, but then when you're telling these stories, you're rattling off these dates, these time frames, and I'm like, wow, that goes by pretty fast. But I'm sure it did during life itself. But
yeah,
But I mean, yeah, you had time to process this stuff too. You know,
Yeah.
a few years at the time.
During the different things that you go through, there's something about God getting you ready for your next move. God knows how to make you ready for that step. Whenever he told me, you know what, I'm ready to try again on the mission field, at first I was like, oh God, here we go again.
Lord.
South Dakota again. But that second time, I can honestly say I knew for myself. The first time I didn't know so much, but the second time I knew it was time to do something different, and that he was preparing my heart for it. By that point, I was ready. Matt was always very prideful about our home. So, our furniture, our home, and for him to say,
All right,
let's
go.
pack up
Let's
and
sell everything
and go, I knew that it was different,
Yeah.
that things was going to be different. So whenever we moved to Eagle Butte, we took that little work there. It was Church of God. We was there a year. We ended up getting a job at the little Christian school, little Baptist school there in Eagle Butte. We lived actually in LaPlante, which was 32 miles from Eagle Butte where we both worked. Different time zone, too. So
Wow.
we would leave our house at 8 o'clock and get to school at 8 o'clock. But whenever you left
Time
to
traveler.
go home, actually get there at 7:30. I'm sorry, because it's 32 minutes to get there. So we'd leave at 8 o'clock and get there at 7:30.
Oh my goodness. My head hurts.
Yeah.
Then we would leave in the afternoon. That's whenever it got tough, because you'd leave at like 4 o'clock, but you wouldn't get home till like almost 6 because,
Yeah.
the
Between
Yes.
the hour and a half difference and evening traffic.
yeah, it was quite. So, and to go to Walmart, we lived an hour and a half away. So everything, it was just a total different life. But during that time, I ended up getting thyroid cancer. And so that really threw a huge spin on things. I'll never forget waking up one morning I couldn't hardly go. And telling my husband I something's wrong. We started investigating and found out that I had thyroid cancer. Again, there is, that's another issue that really made things difficult for Matt because that was his dream again. The spiritual situation that we lived under, y'all may think I'm crazy, but I promise you, the pastor that pastored before us, his wife had cancer. I had cancer, and then the pastor that was after us, his wife has cancer. The spiritual attack that you have there is unreal. As soon as you go on them reservations, it's totally different lifestyle. It's a lot of a third world country type atmosphere.
You can almost see the spiritual warfare.
By far. Yes. It's like whenever you go onto those reservations, it's like going under a cloud, and the attack, the spiritual, one time Matt, after all of this started going down with me and my health, he was on his way to work and he was by himself that day with the kids, and the Lord speaking to him saying, somebody's praying against you right now. And just that's just the kind of stuff that you felt, on the reservation. So I ended up having surgery while we was there, but during all of that, with help of a few family members, they packed us up and we left. And we moved back. So we ended up going to Alabama and helping out with Gilberttown for a while. We was there for several years, and that's whenever our son was born. During that time, I was told I'd never be able to have children again because of the cancer, situations that all of that. And then God blessed us with my little boy 5 years after Avonlea was born. So he's definitely a pride and joy of life.
Yeah, he's a little spoiled, right?
Yeah, not a little.
And so obviously, God helped you through your cancer. You're cancer free today.
Yes, sir.
Praise God.
Then we ended up hitting the road after that and started going from reservation to reservation, doing more like evangelistic type work on the reservations. Probably the most rewarding work we've ever done.
Really?
Yes, sir. I can honestly say that we moved into a motorhome and lived in that we was on the road 5 years. All of Chat's life, clear up till we moved to South Carolina. He had a baby bed for, I think, 2 months of his life. The rest of the time he was in a motorhome. Yeah, my kids lived in a motorhome. So clear up till South Carolina, they didn't have a clue what was a home was like. Or,
Yeah.
My boy definitely didn't. That was the only thing he knew. So that was adventurous. We had a lot of good times on the road. Loved it dearly. We really did. But Matt's health started going downhill at this point. We found out that he had renal failure while we was on the road, and God started changing Matt's heart again to pastor. We was in California at the time whenever we got the phone call to come try out for the church in South Carolina. Now, a fun fact, whenever that first 3 days of us getting married or getting engaged.
Really close there.
Yeah, very, very close. Meeting and getting engaged. He told me, he said, you get ready. One day we're going to live in South Carolina.
Wow.
And I'm going to pastor Graceful Gospel.
Wow.
I don't know how in the world, he knew that, but he did. And whenever they called us, it was kind of, we already knew it was going to happen.
Really?
It was kind of like one of those things, okay.
We're on the way.
All right. So whenever they asked us to come try out, we did. But there again, by this point, God had already started changing our heart, to do something different, that it was time to make some difference, in our lives. I think more for Matt's sake than anything. Mm-hmm. We ended up taking the church in April of 2017, I think. And we lived where I still am right now, actually. And renal failure, we knew it was happening, but because of medical side of things and whatever, I've never been able to get Matt Cooney on life insurance or health insurance or nothing like that because of his size and health and whatever. It was never a possibility. Yeah.
So by then, damage has already been done, right?
Yes, sir. Mm-hmm. Yeah. It runs heavily in his family.
Oh, okay.
It was a inherited gene, I guess. Mm-hmm. His dad, his grandma, his aunt.
How old was he?
He's 40.
And so he got on dialysis, and that helped?
In 2019, yeah, he done really good for a little while. But then he got a little pinhole in his...
peritoneal dialysis.
Yep. The peritoneal dialysis is like it's abdominal. And so like this sugar water goes in. It's kind of like you do strawberries. You put sugar on strawberries. It pulls all the, all the juices out. Pretty much the same concept, but it was in the abdomen. He didn't have the fistula going in the arm that filtered the blood versus. So he had that right at 10 months whenever he got that pinhole. And he ended up getting peritonitis. And then that's where everything went downhill for him. Mm. They'd done the whole round of antibiotics, but during that time it was COVID, really, really strong. And so they wouldn't see you if you was running a fever.
Well, he's got infection, so he's running a fever. Exactly.
But if you're running fever, you can't come in. Mm-hmm. So then you have to go through all these other channels in order to get. It was a lot of craziness.
Do you think if the pandemic wouldn't have happened, that he would have got properly treated and would be here today?
I don't know. I wondered that because of the whole human side of me, probably.
I understand.
But then the other spiritual side of me is like, whenever God's ready for you, there's nothing that you can do.
So when did he pass away?
In August. August 23rd.
Of last year?
Yes, sir.
2020.
So it hasn't even been a year.
It's exactly 15 years from on the day that my first husband was killed in a car accident.
You are joking me.
Nope, same day. 15 years apart.
Mm-hmm.
Heather. That was rough.
Yes, sir.
That was the one day you didn't want that to happen on. Out of 365 of those, you don't think it could have happened on a different day?
It was definitely a crazy day for sure.
Yeah.
I have to say I have the best family in the world.
Yeah.
I do. My dad flew in. My mom came in. Andrew and Rochelle came in. The infection in the body started like moving to the outside, which put him in gruesome pain, very, very bad pain. And of course, the whole COVID thing kind of put a huge, crazy spin on life, because he was in the hospital for 10 days. I couldn't go see him. And during that time, he ended up getting had an allergic reaction to the first vancomycin, which is antibiotics that they gave him.
Strong stuff.
That made him have the red man syndrome. It made him swell really bad, and really just made him almost unrecognizable.
Really?
Mm-hmm. But if you knew Matt Cooney, honestly, I thought I was losing my mind during that time because he kept telling all of his friends, all the family, I'm doing better. I'm getting there. I'm doing better. And at home,
He was so optimistic.
Very. And at home, I'm sitting there going, no, you're not.
You're watching him die.
Exactly. And that would literally make you feel like you are losing your mind because you're thinking, well, maybe I'm the one that's.
Maybe I'm too pessimistic.
Yeah. Maybe I'm the one going crazy here, whenever you're having to pick him up out of the bed and pick him up off the couch. And Matt Cooney didn't let nobody pick him up. He was a very large man, and nobody picked him up. He always done it himself.
Yeah.
Even if he fell, you wasn't going to see it for very long. He's going to be right back up again. He just did not. And so life for everybody, me not even, him telling everybody he's doing better and me over here going, wait a minute, something's going wrong here. But then you felt bad to tell people, no, and then he's telling people, oh, I'm doing better.
Yeah. Tough to swallow.
It was very, very hard, and then he went, that was the first 10 days and they wouldn't let me go to the hospital. So then he came home that Friday. He was back again. No, that was a Wednesday. He was back in the hospital again by Friday. He stayed another 8 days. They sent him home again. He was home a whole week that time. And during that week's time, is probably the most precious, I can honestly say. Matt stayed faithful to God all the way. He never allowed his condition. He never allowed his
circumstance to get him down.
Never. Let's see. He went back in the hospital on Friday. On Thursday night, we're laying there in the bed, and he started crying out to God. There, as if, like nothing was wrong. I mean, the man just started just pouring himself out to God, and hands in the air, and just glory God fell in that room, and knowing that
the situation.
I knew that, things was different. It was changing, in his mind. He kept, God, whatever your will is. He went into that hospital, I think, again on Friday because his shoulder started hurting really bad. And at this point, this is whenever it actually started coming to the outside. By Saturday, family started coming in because at this point,
they knew it wasn't.
I knew, things were not, it wasn't getting better. families started coming in and trying their best to. They let my dad in finally. They moved him into ICU. They let my dad in. And, y'all, it's a miracle they even let Dad go in.
I know, because we don't need to take away from it's COVID.
Exactly.
And it's last year, not this year, so.
For them to let Dad in was crazy. And I probably pulled the whole, can I let the pastor come in? He wants to see his pastor,
Heather,
Whatever
you're a
it
smart woman. You're a
takes.
smart woman.
She needs to be our negotiator.
So I pulled that card. I didn't dare tell him it was my dad, his father-in-law. Yeah. He was a pastor, okay?
That's right.
But by the time my daddy actually got there, they had already started putting sedation on him. And he had already looked at me for the last time at that point. And knowing right then, that night, after they let Daddy in, they let us in. I think him in for about 7 minutes. He was in there. They told us to leave the room, that they had to do the whole COVID test again the second time in, a week? I think 1 week apart, I believe it was. And it wasn't COVID, but because of him running fever, the whole COVID test thing again. And so I wasn't able to go back up there and see him. But during the night, I think it was about 3 o'clock in the morning, he coded. And they brought him back to life. And he was that way clear up till about 9. And then he coded again. And I think again by 11, he's already gone through so much, I was like, y'all, if that happens again, let's just let him go.
It's a tough decision.
By this point, there's no more brain activity,
That's a tough decision
It was a very tough decision. But I didn't have to make the decision to unplug his life support. Right. I didn't have to do any of that. God did it all.
Yeah.
And for that, I'm thankful.
Yeah, absolutely.
I am very, very thankful. Allowing, for that to happen. I have wonderful kids.
Oh, yeah.
My girls are probably what pushes me, to continue.
Throughout this whole year, they've really been your joy.
Oh, yeah. It would be extremely easy to stay home in bed, and just allow things to come and go and not care if it wasn't for the fact that I have, the 3 kids to keep me moving.
Yeah.
But my kids are lively children, and for that I'm so thankful. My boy keeps us, he's very much a boy.
I just listening to your story. The first word that comes to my mind is wow. Wow. I can't imagine going through what you've been through. And I was just in service with you. I think have you been to this youth camp before? Mm-hmm. Okay. I remember seeing you at the youth camp before, but for the very first time I saw you, and I didn't know, forgive me, but I was trying to prepare my mind. Who's Heather? Which one is it? 'Cause I've never met you before. Mm-hmm. And I just saw all the ladies sitting by Brother Andrew Parker, and I was like, I wonder which one's Heather. And so now that I know who you are, I remember looking over there thinking, who is she? Never in a million years, if I'd never met you, never sat down and me and Ryan had this cup of coffee with you, never in a million years would I have ever known what you just shared with us today. Mm-hmm. And the word that just comes to my mind is, wow. Look what God's done. Yeah. It's not even been a year. You've lost your second husband. You're a cancer survivor. Mm-hmm. So tragic, being a teenager, losing your first husband the way you did. You have your kids to keep you going. You have a great, rock-solid family. I think I've just met somebody that's lived in as many states as I have. I think you've got me beat, Heather. I think you've got me beat. I'm California, Oklahoma, Texas, and Georgia.
She was moving for the Lord.
Yeah, I was moving from the law. That's a difference. But the thing that comes to my mind is, wow. So in conclusion, there's a 25-year-old, a 19-year-old girl, or maybe a 30-year-old girl that's in trouble, and she's needing the Lord to help her. And she listens to your story, and she hears everything that you've been through, and your life's nowhere near being over. I see God's faithfulness in your life.
Yes, sir.
How would you encourage somebody after listening to your story, the story of Heather Cooney? What would you tell somebody that's going through a dark trial, that has that fear that you had back in the day, and who just needs some word of wisdom or advice to get them through what they're facing?
I would have to say faithfulness to God pays off. Mm-hmm. Through everything, Brother Andrew, that I've been through everything. It doesn't matter what you face. God's faithfulness is amazing. Yeah. And his people are amazing. For a person to sit back and say, I've heard it so many times, y'all, since going through it a couple of times, I can't imagine going through what you go. I would die. Yeah, you probably would if you was thrown into it right now. Right. But God has a way of preparing you for what you face. Yeah. If you're willing to do it. Mm-hmm. That's the hardest part right there.
Get me willing, God.
That's exactly right. If you're faithful to him, he's going to make sure that he carries you through it. And his faithfulness, y'all, I cannot express it enough. I can honestly say that I have always had a desire to serve God. I don't know what it's like to live for the devil. I honestly don't. I've always known I was going to be a missionary. I always knew I was going to be a preacher's wife. The only thing I said, God, I don't want to be a pastor's wife. Oh. But I always knew it was going to happen. And the fact that my dad is probably one of the best examples that I can think of in faithfulness to God, regardless of what you're going through. And every time that I've gone through anything, knowing that the strength that I was born with, that I carry, and through God, I can make it through.
Thank God.
I can make it through. And y'all, even right now, I'm facing so many things right now with trying to find another place to live, because I live in the parsonage and we're getting a new pastor. And so I'm having to be thrown into a whole nother, I'm now the single sole provider for our home, and trying to make sure that my family is carried brings a whole new level of
uncertainty.
Yeah. And to say that you get tired would be a lie.
Yeah.
It would be. I do get tired, but I can honestly say I don't feel like giving up. Mm-mm. I don't feel like giving up is even an option.
It's not.
It's not an option in my life. And so, y'all, I teased my husband several times, and at the time it wasn't a joke, but, here it goes. First getting married, well, you're moving out or you're sleeping on the couch, whatever. And my whole thing was you can kick me out all you want, but that's still my bed. You can't kick me out of it. So the same determination with my walk with God is the same.
Yeah. I love it.
There not being another option in a marriage is the same with me having a relationship with God.
It's serious to you. It's
very serious with me. And I don't have a desire to live for anybody else other than him.
That's right. So faithfulness to God is what carries her through. So you said that right now you're facing some new challenges as far as finding a place to stay, which I wasn't aware of. That's the first I heard of that. This podcast is all about hearing stories of people, and your story has blessed me tremendously. I think you're a very virtuous person. I think God's blessed you, and I don't see any excuse for anybody, Ryan, to get bitter with God, given circumstance or anything that Heather shared with us. But what we do on the podcast, we hear each other's stories, and we are setting up to do some amazing things. And this is probably for the listeners from day one who have heard us. This has been a goal of mine from day one to do some awesome stuff on the podcast, not just to hear people's stories. And so we actually just got our incorporation. So we're Pentecast Podcast Incorporated, and we just put our application in to be a 501c3, a nonprofit organization.
It's amazing.
Because we have people that have donated to us because they see this is a mission work. Obviously, your late husband, Matt, saw this.
Yeah.
And so with that said, the Pentecast Podcast is going to be donating $500 to you to help you get in that place, because God's obviously been good to you, but he's been good to us and everybody that listens that just got to enjoy your story, want to pitch in and do that. So you can thank the patrons and all the viewers and everybody that's been so good. But this is what the podcast has been about since day one.
Well, thank you. I appreciate it.
Thank you for coming and drinking a cup of coffee with us today. I hope you enjoyed it.
Yes, sir. I did.
Thank you
very much
for coming. Ryan, my heart is full.
My eyes are too.
Close us out.
Thank you so much for coming. You've made my life and Andrew's lives so much fuller. Just sitting here listening to you. And I know everybody that watches and listens to this will feel the same way.
For sure.
Have a good week. We love you. Over and under.